Every serious athlete in the world knows a truth that took sports science decades to prove, and that most men outside of athletic training have never once applied to their own bodies. That the work you do during effort is not what makes you stronger, it is what makes you tired. The strength, the endurance, the improved capacity, the measurable performance gains, none of those things are built during the session. They are built in the hours and days that follow it, when the body is given the space, the nutrition, and the rest it needs to repair what the effort broke down and rebuild it at a higher level than it was before. This principle is one of the most fundamental laws of human biology. It applies to cardiovascular training, to resistance training, to cognitive performance, and it applies with equal precision and equal consequence to sexual stamina training. Recovery is not the pause between the work. Recovery is where the work actually happens. Quick disclaimer: this is educational content based on research. If you have serious concerns, talk to a healthcare provider. To understand why recovery is not optional in sexual stamina training, but is in fact the central mechanism through which improvement actually occurs, you have to begin with the biological process that every form of physical and neurological training shares: the adaptation cycle. When the body is subjected to a training stimulus, whether that stimulus is lifting a heavy weight, running a sustained distance, practicing breathing techniques, or engaging in deliberate sexual stamina exercises, it responds in a predictable and well-documented sequence. First, it experiences stress, the disruption of its current equilibrium. Second, it initiates a repair process, mobilizing resources, rebuilding damaged tissue, and reinforcing the neural pathways that the effort engaged. Third, and this is the part that most men miss entirely, it supercompensates. It rebuilds not just to the level it was before the stimulus, but slightly above it, creating a new, higher baseline of capacity in direct anticipation of the next time that stimulus arrives. This supercompensation is where all genuine improvement lives. It is not a metaphor. It is a measurable physiological event, documented across every discipline of sports science and human performance research, and it only occurs during recovery. The implication of this for sexual stamina training is both simple and profound. Every breathing practice, every mindfulness exercise, every deliberate technique applied to building endurance and control creates a neurological and physiological demand on the body. The nervous system is engaged. The pelvic floor musculature is recruited. The hormonal systems that govern arousal, control, and recovery are activated. And like every other system in the human body, these systems require time and resources to process what has been asked of them before they are ready to be asked again. The man who trains every day without adequate recovery between sessions is not building stamina faster than the man who trains with intelligent rest built into his program. He is interrupting his own adaptation cycle at the precise moment when the most important work, the rebuilding, the reinforcement, the supercompensation, was scheduled to occur. He is, in the most literal biological sense, working harder to make less progress. The parallel to resistance training is exact and instructive. No credible strength coach in the world programs a serious athlete to train the same muscle group to maximum intensity every single day. The reason is not laziness or insufficient ambition. The reason is that the muscle cannot complete its repair and supercompensation cycle in less than 48 to 72 hours, and training it again before that cycle completes does not accelerate growth. It prevents it. Sexual stamina training obeys the same biological timeline, governed by the same principles, producing the same consequences when those principles are ignored. Here is where the absence of recovery reveals something genuinely alarming, something that most men engaged in any form of stamina training never see coming because it arrives not as a sudden failure, but as a slow, accumulating erosion that is almost impossible to distinguish from ordinary fatigue until the damage is already done. The man who trains without adequate recovery does not plateau. He regresses, and he regresses in a way that is particularly demoralizing because the harder he pushes in response to the declining results, the faster the regression accelerates. This is the phenomenon that exercise physiologists call overtraining syndrome. And while the term was developed in the context of competitive athletic training, its mechanisms apply with equal precision to any system in the human body that is being asked to perform, adapt, and improve under consistent demand. What overtraining actually looks like in the context of sexual stamina training is not always obvious from the outside. It does not announce itself with a dramatic breakdown or a single catastrophic session. It builds quietly through the accumulation of sessions that each leave the nervous system slightly more depleted than the last, the hormonal system slightly more dysregulated, the psychological relationship with the training slightly more pressured and performance-focused and disconnected from the ease and presence that genuine stamina actually requires. The nervous system, which is the primary system through which sexual control and endurance operate, is particularly vulnerable to the consequences of insufficient recovery. Unlike skeletal muscle, which communicates its need for rest through soreness and stiffness that are difficult to ignore, the nervous system's fatigue is largely invisible until it crosses a threshold. A man can feel subjectively ready to train while his nervous system is operating at 60% of its optimal capacity, and the training he performs in that state does not produce adaptation. It produces further depletion. Over time, this accumulation of under-recovered sessions creates a neurological environment characterized by heightened sensitivity, reduced control, increased anxiety around performance, and a paradoxical decrease in the very endurance the training was designed to build. The psychological dimension of this deterioration compounds the physiological one in a feedback loop that will be familiar to anyone who has read about performance anxiety. The declining results create pressure. The pressure creates tension. The tension further disrupts the nervous system's ability to regulate the responses that control requires. And the man who began his training program with genuine optimism finds himself months later performing worse than he did before he started and unable to understand why. The answer in almost every case is not that he trained incorrectly. It is that he never recovered. Building recovery into a sexual stamina training program is not a concession to weakness, and it is not a sign that a man is training with insufficient dedication. It is the single most intelligent structural decision he can make, because it is the decision that determines whether all of the other effort he is investing will actually produce the results it is capable of producing. The first and most foundational recovery principle is sleep, and its role in this specific context goes far beyond simple rest. During the deep sleep cycles that occur in the first half of a full night of uninterrupted sleep, the body releases the majority of its growth hormone, completes the majority of its nervous system repair, and resets the hormonal environment that sexual function, control, and endurance all depend on. 7 to 9 hours of consistent, uninterrupted sleep is not a lifestyle preference. It is the non-negotiable biological precondition for any training adaptation to actually consolidate into lasting improvement. The second recovery principle is nutritional support. Specifically, the provision of adequate protein for neurological tissue repair, healthy fats for hormonal production, and micronutrients including zinc, magnesium, and vitamin D that directly support the endocrine and nervous systems being rebuilt during recovery. A man who trains intelligently but eats in a way that deprives his body of the raw materials recovery requires is a man whose adaptation cycle cannot complete regardless of how much sleep he gets, because the body cannot rebuild what it does not have the materials to construct. The third recovery principle is mental rest, the deliberate, scheduled removal of performance pressure and training focus from the psychological environment between sessions. This means approaching the recovery period not as empty time to be endured before the next session, but as an active and necessary component of the training program itself. A period during which the nervous system is not being evaluated, not being monitored for progress, and not being subjected to the analytical, outcome-focused attention that training sessions require. The man who obsesses over his progress during his recovery days is not accelerating his improvement. He is extending his nervous system's time in a state of activation that prevents the parasympathetic restoration his adaptation cycle depends on. The fourth and perhaps most counterintuitive principle is patience. The understanding that the training program producing the fastest genuine results is not the most intense one or the most frequent one, but the most intelligently periodized one, the one that builds effort and recovery into a deliberate rhythm that the body can sustain indefinitely and improve within consistently. Rest is not the reward for hard work. Rest is what makes hard work worth doing. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.